One of the toughest lessons, I think, that I've ever had to learn as a parent has been that tantrums are not a sign that one's child is bad per se. Stay with me. But rather, a tantrum is a child crying out to the parent, crying out for help. Tantrums, they signal that we're out of control, that we're trying to regain control, sometimes regain control over the parent, but they are cries for a need for attention, for help, for mercy even, to be shown that they're loved. Tantrums are a sign, probably above all, that we need to be shown love, that we need to be reminded, and that we are somebody else's beloved. And children really exemplify that. But to be honest, most of us, not all, but most of us has seen our share of tantrums from children, yes, but also from adults. I mean, coworkers and neighbors throw tantrums. Friends, our spouses, throw tantrums. And even though I know that every single one of us at home, none of us have ever thrown a tantrum. Most people we know have. They've acted out at the very least. Tantrums can be seen from very public settings, like town hall meetings or in restaurants where somebody gets wine or water or whatever thrown in their face and somebody storms off, to even the most private sanctuaries of the home. Tantrums are part of life. I've noticed over the years a pattern, however, when someone throws a tantrum. As out of control as the person might actually be, from a small child all the way to an adult, the person will almost always turn away from the one they're arguing with or fighting with or tantruming to. And they force the other to kind of come around and face them. Have you ever had a small child, your own or a child of a friend or niece, nephew, some family member, throw a tantrum? The body language very much is to turn their back to you, to force you to come around and address them. There's this attempt to, control, to gain some power or some ground perhaps, but it's also a desperate plea. It's a plea to push the boundaries, to be shown unconditional love, acceptance. One slightly strange way, I think, of reading the Bible is to see a pattern throughout, almost from beginning to end, of one tantrum after another. Almost the entirety of the Old Testament is a pattern of the children of God pushing boundaries, of being given the boundary or be given some sort of, condition on the way that they work or some sort of, consequence for their actions or something along those lines. And there's a tantrum. There's a throwing a fit to have God turn God's face back towards them, to pay attention to them, to love them, to care for them. That pattern has evolved over the centuries within the Bible. The Psalms themselves, if you really read closely, so many of them are like children crying out for a parent to pay attention to them, sometimes even yelling, demanding the attention. The prophets even almost seem to be the voice of reason. Maybe if we're going to talk about children being the tantrum thrower and God being the parent, maybe a friend or an older sibling, the prophets say, just turn back and face God. Just repent, turn, and face, and it'll all go away. It'll all get better if you just stop throwing the tantrum and turn and face God. Tantrums, are almost the extreme end, I would say, of base setting in our need for nurture. We throw tantrums because we feel like we're at the end of our rope, we're out of control, we don't know what to do next. And hopefully we grow up and grow out of doing this. But we also so want for God to turn and face us that we forget to turn ourselves back to God. And this may be the very central theme of the entire story we have for today. So let's stop, let's pause, and let's hear it together. Now, as soon as they had left the synagogue, they enter the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now, Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once, and him being Jesus. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. Now, that evening at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed by demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came to do." Now, we could chop up this entire story into these teeny tiny little subplots all along the way. We could focus on Simon, who would become Cephas or Peter, and his mother-in-law. We could focus on the crowd starting to come around the house. We could focus on Jesus leaving. But really, there are three things. At the heart of it all, there are really just three things that are going on here. One, people start seeking out Jesus to be healed, to the point where it becomes almost a frenzy of activity. Two, Jesus steps away for solitude and prayer. And three, when the disciples, who I hope you caught it at home, who we hear have been hunting for Jesus, when they find him, he tells them that they're going to be moving on away from that village so he can proclaim the message to people in other villages, because that is what he has come to do. It's not that healing or casting out of demons, as we've heard, is alien to or outside of what Jesus is about. But it is a recognition that Jesus is on a course that he cannot be deviated from. And everything hinges on that second part of the story. So what is that message that Jesus has come to proclaim? First of all, Jesus preaches forgiveness. I think that's the cornerstone of it. Jesus preaches forgiveness from anything that has cut us off or separated us. And that when we turn back to God, we find peace. Talking over the past couple of weeks with our parish associate, Tom, really just about this story, in fact, he was reminded of another pastor who once reflected back on Jesus stepping away by saying that if we don't step apart, we come apart. Now, I have to admit, as lovely as that sounds, we don't step apart, we come apart. The fact is, I'm probably butchering the original phrase. I'm probably butchering whatever it was that Tom actually told me. But that's how I remembered it. The point is, however, that Jesus seems to set himself apart from the moment, apart from everything that is going on, all the expectations that he will be the healer, and all those demands. And he turns, he goes apart from it all to refocus, to center himself, and to pray to God. Now, while the crowds and even his own disciples began losing their heads to try to get Jesus' attention, he steps aside to remain focused on why he has come there in the first place. The disciples, we're told, are hunting for Jesus, okay? Now, I imagine immediately a fox hunting scene of poor Jesus scrambling to get away as fast as he can, being pursued by the crowds, including his own followers, just to get a moment of peace, to get back to what really matters the most. It's this question of orientation. We so want for God to turn and see us, to know that we matter, that we are known, that we're loved, that we forget to turn ourselves around to face towards God. In the story of Simon's mother-in-law, for example, she has this serious fever, and we hear that Jesus has now healed her, and hearing that has taken place, the whole town crowds around the door to this little house seeking to be healed and from all kinds of illnesses. Even some exorcisms are being requested. And with perhaps very few exceptions, I doubt many of us, hopefully, are seeking an exorcism right now. But we're all facing illness, and some of them are life-threatening. Some are facing crippling illnesses. In fact, some are facing soul-wrenching addiction, the emptiness of alcoholism. We face self-doubt, abuse, self-harm, and neglect. We wonder and we worry about the state of our world and of our nation. And we worry about our friends and our neighbors, our spouses, our children. We have so much need for healing. And it can be jarring to think of Jesus stepping away for some self-care in a moment like this. With so much need around him, he gets up early so he can avoid the crowds and get away. It's almost like just when people needed him most, Jesus seems to disappear, and his own disciples have to set out in hot pursuit for him. Only, that's not exactly what Jesus is doing. We're told that early in the morning, when it was still very dark, Jesus went out. He went to be apart from all of it. It's not escapism. Something else is going on. I mean, did you know that the words holy and sacred have to do with setting things apart? If we think back to Moses, for example, in the burning bush, he's told that he needs to remove his shoes to stand on that holy or the set apart ground. That what he does there needs to be different from what he does in his normal life. In essence, for something to be sacred means that it has been set apart as special or unique. In fact, the sacraments themselves are when we mark as humans that something holy is happening. The sacraments themselves are a time that has been set apart. Now, we Protestants, for the most part, have two sacraments, baptism and the Lord's Supper, while our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters have an additional 5. They have confirmation, penance, extreme unction, which for us is actually related to communion, so they're kind of one and the same for us, ordination, and matrimony. Well, Frederick Buechner has said that whenever we hit one of these milestones, and it could be such as seeing a baby baptized or even experiencing our own baptism, confession, whenever we are married or dying, we're apt, he says, we are apt to catch a glimpse of the almost unbearable preciousness and the mystery of life. What he says is, when we encounter these major moments in our lives, Buechner says we are apt to catch glimpses of the almost unbearable preciousness and the mystery of life. That's what it means for it to be holy or touched by God, for it to be set apart. That these moments are held as reverent because they carry with them so much that is precious. In other words, we see God at work in our lives by doing these things. These moments have been set aside to help us see the most real beauty of being human. Our relationships with God, our relationships with each other, our senses of identity and call. The sacraments turn our attention to the sacred in our own lives. They turn us so that we can see that God is already facing us. That's what the sacraments do. And yet, to quote a phrase that I grew up hearing in my own household by my father, he would say that God didn't go through all the trouble of becoming human to make us more religious, but rather to make us more human. Jesus does not stop what he is doing by getting up early in the morning to perform some sacred rite of his religion. He gets up early, he goes and sets himself apart from everything else to simply pray, to connect with God, to spend time with God in that moment, right then, right there. Jesus is stepping away early that morning to pray, and it becomes a turning point for his followers. And it becomes that for them then, and it's a turning point that we can turn to as well. It can be just as important for us. The instinct so often is to only sense the presence of God in our lives when things have worked out or when tragedy has been averted somehow. But Jesus has not come to preach or to teach that God shows up when everything's hunky-dory, but rather to invite us into a deeper reality that every single moment of our lives, even those that are laden down with fear or depression or anxiety, a host of other ills, that every moment is sacred. And at every moment, God is with us. If only we turn to see it.